In the frozen wastelands of the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad stands as a monument to human endurance, despair, and the dark extremes of war. It was here, among the ruins of a city bearing Stalin's name, that one of World War II's most brutal confrontations unfolded. A battle that would turn the tide against Nazi Germany. In 6 months of fighting, the combined Axis and Allied forces at Stalingrad suffered over 1 million dead and countless more wounded or suffering from disease. Men fought in subzero temperatures, without proper clothing or supplies, where frostbite claimed fingers and toes before bullets could claim lives. The city became a gruesome tableau of war's savagery, with soldiers suffering injuries that defied medical understanding and pushed the boundaries of human pain and resilience. The Battle of Stalingrad is believed to be the single, bloodiest battle ever fought. The battle for Stalingrad began on the 23rd of August, 1942. Operation Barbarossa, the Axis invasion of the Soviet Union, had started over a year prior, in June of 1941. The Red Army had been pushed deeper and deeper into Russia by the Nazis' infamous blitzkrieg. The lack of experienced officers, armored vehicles, aircraft, and basic provisions, such as boots and rations, meant the Soviets suffered a year of defeat after defeat. Stalingrad would prove to be a significant turning point in the war. At Stalingrad, the German army would be devastated, marking the beginning of the long westward retreat back towards Germany. The battle raged between the 23rd of August 1942 and the 2nd of February 1943. It pitted the combined forces of the Germans, Italians, Romanians, Hungarians, and Croatians against the Soviet Red Army. In order to encourage the Soviets to fight and to never surrender the city, Stalin ordered the civilians not to evacuate. The presence of civilians meant that collateral damage was high during the initial siege, but especially during the intense urban warfare and street-to-street combat. No one was safe from danger. Many of the casualties of Stalingrad were not from direct combat, but from other factors such as disease or starvation. Those who weren't wounded in combat could still find themselves dead or injured in many other ways. Illness and disease. Temperatures at the Battle of Stalingrad were routinely 20 or 30 degrees below freezing, even reaching minus 40 degrees in November. These conditions meant frostbite was common. Even those soldiers lucky enough to have winter clothing were not safe from the cold. The lack of adequate medical supplies and the sheer number of soldiers suffering meant men were often not treated in time, resulting in many cases of gangrene. The German forces were running low on ether, antiseptics, and chloroform, meaning amputations and other serious surgeries were often carried out without anesthetic. The lack of antiseptics for sterilizing tools and wounds meant fresh wounds had to be cauterized. This was usually done with a bayonet, heated over a fire until red hot, then used to burn the wound closed. This method was not perfect and could still result in infection. Infectious disease was also commonplace. Large populations living in dense formations is always a catalyst for disease, but the specific conditions of Stalingrad made this problem even worse. Both Axis and Soviet forces were running low on even basic medical equipment, such as antibiotics to cure the infection or antiseptics to sterilize tools and wounds. Even fresh, sterile bandages were in short supply. A wound that would otherwise be easily treated with antibiotics or antiseptics was left to fester, causing many cases of sepsis and gangrene. During the initial retreat to Stalingrad, the Soviet army was doing battle with another enemy, cholera. An epidemic of cholera threatened to disable the entire army. The first cases were discovered on the 18th of July, just a month before the battle for the city began. Many soldiers fell to cholera. Infection was spread through consuming water or food contaminated by the feces of an infected individual, and the high concentration of men meant many sources of water were contaminated. The disease can kill within hours, as the person loses large amounts of fluid to diarrhea, leading to deadly dehydration. Large numbers of men living in such close proximity meant lice were ubiquitous, and these lice often spread typhus. Those infected would suffer from vomiting, muscle and joint pain, extreme fevers, chills, confusion, and more. Dysentery, diphtheria, tuberculosis, and jaundice were also present at the Battle of Stalingrad due to the highly unhygienic conditions within the city and the extreme malnutrition. With the city in ruins, there was no working sewage system or water supply, and the people of Stalingrad were living amongst their own waste and frozen dead bodies, while flies and vermin helped spread the illness and disease between the dead and the living. Disease was present in every corner of Stalingrad on both sides. Wounds could not be cleaned. Bandages were rinsed with water and reused, and even medical implements could not be sterilized. Starvation and malnutrition. As the German army steamrolled towards Stalingrad, Soviet forces shipped large amounts of grain and livestock out of the city and across the Volga River to prevent the Germans from capturing it. Grain that could not be transported was contaminated with diesel or oil, rendering it unfit for human consumption. This meant a lack of adequate food, among other things. Rations were cut as the months rolled on, and men on both sides were barely surviving on starvation rations. The freezing cold and extreme physical and mental exertion exasperated the issue, as men burnt calories in combat that could not be replaced. Both armies were isolated from their supply lines, unable to stock up on food and medicine. As the Soviet army tightened its grip on the faltering Axis forces, the rations for the fighting men were reduced. The standard ration for a German soldier engaged in combat was 300 grams of meat and 150 grams of bread. During Stalingrad, at the worst points of the battle, this daily ration was reduced to 75 grams of bread, about one slice, and 2 portions of watery soup. Men would sometimes have a small portion of canned meat, if available. This meager ration was not enough to survive on, especially in such cold weather and with so much physical exertion. During the battle, many German soldiers dropped dead, despite no physical injuries or apparent disease. After thawing out the bodies, an autopsy was conducted, and the discoveries shocked German medics. All the internal organs had shrunk to half their original size, making them unable to perform their functions. Their bodies were totally void of any body fat. They had starved to death. Many within Stalingrad resorted to eating livestock, pet cats and dogs, or even vermin, and the city's animal population was decimated. As a Christmas treat, the army slaughtered 4,000 workhorses to feed the men. When the meat was consumed, the bones were used for soups. Motorized divisions equipped with cars and trucks did not have any horses of their own to slaughter, and so received only small amounts from other regiments. The malnutrition was so extreme that many men stopped growing facial hair because their bodies were so devoid of energy. Some soldiers were so underfed that they resorted to consuming anything that might fill them up: wallpaper, window sealant, cloth. Many men even made soup from boiled leather straps or old shoes. Some civilians resorted to eating the blood-soaked clay that lined the banks of the Volga River, which was supposedly sweet. Those unable to cope with the starvation often resorted to the extreme of cannibalism. Soviet and German forces would execute anyone found to have consumed human meat, but it is estimated that there were between 1,000 and 2,000 cases of cannibalism during the 6-month battle. Combat wounds. Intense fighting meant that combat wounds were common at Stalingrad. The city was under siege. Over 1 million bombs were dropped by Axis aircraft, and hundreds of thousands of artillery shells were fired. The bombing and shelling resulted in the destruction of 41,000 houses, or 90% of all residential housing in the city. No one at Stalingrad was safe from the fighting. On the first day of battle, the 23rd of August, the Luftwaffe flew 1,600 bombing runs, dropping over 1,000 tons of explosives. Buildings, many still occupied by soldiers and civilians, were destroyed, and incendiary bombs set the city ablaze. The city was engulfed in a thick, black smog, rising thousands of feet into the sky. Those families that survived fled to nearby ravines and rivers in an attempt to escape the raging fire. When Axis forces entered the city, intense street-to-street fighting began. The Soviet soldiers created fortified positions amongst the rubble and remaining buildings. They waited in ambush or used guerrilla tactics against the invading army, resulting in some of the most intense urban warfare in history. The nature of the battle meant groups of soldiers could fight for days or weeks, battling to take control of a single building or even a single floor, and an entire section or company of men might be wiped out in a battle for control of an old bakery or shop. Many soldiers have told their stories of Stalingrad. One young Soviet soldier described the brutal scene along the Volga River. The bank of the river was covered in dead fish, mixed with human heads, arms, and legs, all lying on the beach. They were the remains of people who were being evacuated across the Volga when they were bombed. After the battle, the death continues. On the 2nd of February, 1943, after almost 6 months of brutal fighting, the German 6th Army was surrounded and forced to surrender. They were out of ammunition, out of food, and out of energy. The end of the battle, however, did not mean an end to the suffering. The German surrender resulted in almost 100,000 men being taken as prisoners of war. These POWs were sent to Soviet work camps and used as forced labor. These men faced back-breaking work in extreme weather conditions. Prisoners were deprived of food and medical care and would receive routine beatings from camp guards. Most would not last until the end of the war, with those who did not starve to death being killed by disease or an angry Soviet guard. Of the 100,000 German prisoners taken at Stalingrad, only 5,000 would ever return home. Some POWs would not leave the Soviet labor camps until 1955, 10 years after the war had ended. The Battle of Stalingrad would result in an estimated 1.2 million dead and hundreds of thousands more injured and wounded, many of whom would become disabled for life. The battle would sink to the deepest depths of depravity, driving otherwise ordinary men to incredible feats of cruelty and inhumanity, blindness, missing limbs, disease, deafness. No one who served at Stalingrad would come away unharmed. Having seen so much death and corruption, those who had managed to avoid physical wounds would still come away from the battlefield mentally scarred. Anyone who survived the war would never forget the sights, the sounds, and the smells of Stalingrad. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.